for those who are listening, whether they've heard of it or they haven't, or they have misconceptions or they think they know what it is, what is the red pill?
To me, what the red pill is intersexual dynamics, which is exactly what you were saying before. I'll tell you a quick story.
Please do.
I was March of 2021, and I had just started getting involved with Fresh and Fit. And I think we were into our third show, and I was interviewed. I still have this clip today. I use this as an intro sometimes on my own show. But there's a clip where they asked me exactly the same question. They said, do you think that the red pill is going to go mainstream? And my answer to both of the guys was, I hope not. And there's a reason I said that is because what happens is when it goes mainstream, people will take the red pill as a kind of a loose brand or a term. And if it seems like it's something cool that the kids are doing, then they'll call it red pill, right? Now that we're in an election cycle, really started kind of like about like June of last year, really. But an election cycle is really 18 months now. It's not just a year. So right around June of the year prior to an election cycle, that's when you see everyone pivoting towards like social issues and political issues. And what happens during those times is as people, especially traditional conservatives, want to pick up whatever is hot and whatever is trending at that time. And we saw the same thing happen back in 2015, 2016. So, for instance, if you go back to Twitter, Twix, whatever, around that time, and you look up Candace Owens' Twitter account, she used to call herself Red Pill Black. So what's red pill, right? Back then, people want to say, well, it's the alt-right. Or, well, it's a political thing. It's just seeing the truth for what it really is. And what happens is when it becomes ambiguous like that, and it's not like clearly, distinctly defined as intersexual dynamics, people take the red pill to be whatever their pet ideology happens to be. So if it's conservatism, that's the red pill. If it's I'm anti-feminism, that's the red pill. If it's vote for Trump, that's the red pill. MAGA, that's the red pill. Alt-right, that's the red pill. It's not the red pill. The red pill to me anyways has been and always will be about intersexual dynamics. So when I got into having these conversations with guys, I've been doing this, but people really know this. I've been doing this for like 22 years now. Yeah. And I went back, people have asked me this before, I went back to look for my first instance of me using the term red pill on my old forums, like back in 2004. So for the red pill, or what we call the manosphere right now, there was no manosphere back then. But December of 2004 was the first time I ever found a post of me using that on the old SoSuave.net forums, which, by the way, is still around today. They're still active today. So there was the forum years, and then there was the blog years, and then there's sort of like the social media years sort of gets threaded into that. And then now we're at the YouTube years, right? Or the video production years. And so I've seen the red pill go from just guys getting together in forums and comparing notes to being guys like having religious, battles with each other and saying, Jesus says the red pill is incompatible with, Orthodox Eastern religion or Catholicism or Mormons or whatever it is. I'm like, dude, that's not the red pill. Yeah. The red pill to me anyways it's the praxiology of intersexual dynamics. And people think that when I say that, people think that that's some sort of cop-out. Because when myself or someone like Mike Sartain or Ryan Stone or some of these other guys that I've been working with for almost, some of them over a decade now, when we are talking about the red pill, we are just talking about factual absolutism. Meaning we're just saying what is true and what is not true. How you use that truth, and it's really sort of a pursuit of truth is what it is. Praxiology, outside of sort of the economics definition, there's two definitions. There's the economics definition, and then there's the classical Greek definition, which is a praxiology is the study of human behavior, in that human behavior has purpose, has intent, there's a reason why we do those things. It's not about good. It's not about evil. It's not about what's right, what's wrong. It's not even about what's best practices. It's just getting to the point, finding out why we do what we do. And in the red pill sense, that's about intersexual dynamics. It's about male nature, female nature, evolutionary psychology, sociology, neurology, endocrinology. How many ologies do we have, And so it's a very, very broad spectrum, because when you think about how many ways intersexual dynamics crosses into all these like subfields, when people ask me, they say, well, what's the red pill? Give me the elevator pitch for the red pill. There is no elevator pitch for the red pill because it's like a college major.
Yes.
It's not a bumper sticker. It's not something you just slap on the back of your car and say, I'm red pill, right? So when I'm talking about red pill, I'm talking about like empirical, factual absolutism about the things that are, not the things that should be. The problem is right now, there's too many people who want to jump into this space and say, this is what should be. So I don't talk about best practices. I talk about what is.
Yes.
So when people say, well, the red pill is this or the red pill is that, it's like, no, you haven't been in this field long enough to understand what a praxeology is. Or
I find most people who talk about it and who criticize it now, it's very clear they first came across the term sometime in the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, people think that the red pill begins and ends with Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis. That's what they think. And when I listen to personalities like Destiny say, oh, the red pill's dead, it's over now. I'm like, no, dude, it's been going on for, at least in my case, for the last 22, 23 years. Yeah. You simply don't have the depth of knowledge of how we even got to this point in the first place. Because if it makes if it gets click-through rate, if it gets eyes on the screen, if it gets audience retention, if it gets impressions on YouTube, then that's the new hot topic and everybody wants to be a part of it. The good news is that these things come in cycles. So during 2015, 2016, that election cycle, red pill was whatever people wanted to make it. In 2019, 2020, everybody wanted to pivot out of red pill and wanted to get into social issues and MAGA this and alt-right that. And now we see exactly the same thing happen. So that's when I was talking to Myron and Fresh in March of 2021. That's why I said, I hope not. Because what happens is individuals come into this space and they got no business being in the space. Yeah. And suddenly they become authorities on the red pill and they don't even know what they're talking about because they have no background in it. And for the red pill to remain about the facts, about empirical, reality, about the data, about the stats, about the praxeology of the red pill, it kind of has to stay underground. Yeah. It has to, or underground, maybe that's not their term, but it has to be in some way like non-mainstream. Right?
Yeah, well, it gets corrupted otherwise. I mean, one question I was wondering from your perspective, firstly, how much do you care about sort of owning that term? Is that something, do you get annoyed when you see the term being misused or just sort of being used as a pejorative or just being thrown in this way?
It gets into gatekeeping. It gets into a lot of gatekeeping stuff. And some people, we've had discussions about this before in some of the groups I'm in. Should we be gatekeeping? Should we not be gatekeeping? I've always been of the opinion that the red pill is open source. Okay. So I'm not the first word and I'm not the last word. I'm a very loud voice. I've been consistent in the red pill, like I said, for 20 some odd years. So I'd like to think I have at least some sort of authority in this. I have some sort of recognition and some sort of definitely some notoriety in this. But I'm not the last voice. I'm not the first voice. I'm not the last voice. And by the way, Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis are most definitely not going to be the first or the last either. Well, so same with Myron and Fresh, right?
It's interesting with Tate because Tate, as far as I know, doesn't even call himself.
Not anymore, but
did he?
What's interesting? Oh yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I did some of the earliest interviews with Tate. People don't understand my background and my history with Tate. When people say, "Oh, Rollo threw Tate under the bus" or whatever, I'm kind of Tate agnostic right now. But I did some of the earliest interviews with Tate on my own channel back in 2017 and 2018. Okay. And so I've known him. I've known Tristan for probably longer than anybody who wants to tell you they went to high school together with him, which they didn't, right? So back in the day, he definitely wanted to be red pill. He was part of our red pill. Well, what was the manosphere back then? He was definitely part of that group. And then Tate morphed into the Tate that we know from 2020 on, and so he became. He sort of metamorphized into something that we think of as Andrew Tate right now. But back then, he definitely he called himself Red Pill even on my show. So, but now, of course, what happens is once we get into an election cycle and everybody wants to pivot away, now everybody's Red Pill adjacent, right? And to me, that's fence riding. Quite honestly, I'm Rollo Tomasi. I am the Red Pill. Like there's no adjacent for me. There's no I'm going to pivot out into, I don't know, make a fishing channel or something. That's not going to work for me. So, I am what I am.
But do you think the term can be reclaimed? Because when I now hear it being used by kind of everyday people, what they mean is not what it's really supposed to mean. No. All right. So I've been aware of the terminology as you're referring to it for at least 15 years.
I mean, hell, when you and I first did the first interview together,
Yeah,
I think I was a red pill guy and you wanted to have me
Yeah,
on the
well,
show.
I read The Rational Male around the time it came out. And prior to that, I mean, I was aware of, I don't know, there was all the whole like mystery method time and Neil Strauss.
So that was a forum era.
Yes,
and that's
right.
the pickup artist
so there was all that. And so I've got a longer term view of, okay, this is what it is. And then now when people talk about red pill or red pill men this or red pill guys that, it's usually it's a straw man typically being used normally by conservatives, but also sometimes by people on the left to kind of just like attack, I don't know, people they want to call incels or some type of misogyny and these guys who hate women and they're anti-marriage and they're this. It's like a straw man attack. So in the same way that lots of people on the left they have this idea of, you know, a racist or a white supremacist and they just kind of throw everything they don't like into that bucket. And I'm now seeing a lot of traditional conservatives even just kind of, there's this basket of icky ideas and people I don't like, and we're just going to call them red pill men, and I'm just going to kind of completely straw man what that means and attack it in that way. So it's at that point where I wonder if the term can be reclaimed. It's a bit like I've had this conversation with some what I would call decent and reasonable feminists who are very keen on keeping hold of the term feminism and feminist because they're just like, no, I really mean this as in equality and fairness, and I'm not anti-men, and I'm not, you know, part of some female supremacist movement and so on. And I tend to tell them, I'm like, look, I just think the term has lost its, I don't think it can be reclaimed. I think it's been so corrupted.
The term feminist is, people like identifying as a feminist in the 21st century is virtually meaningless today because, and I've said this I've said this to conservatives, I said this to liberals, I said, if you were born after 1965, you're a feminist. You have had some form of feminism that has influenced your thinking, whether it was in college, whether it was in school, whether it was from like you're watching these Saturday morning cartoons. In some way, shape, or form, you have had feminist ideology just like drip fed into your influences and the things that sort of like, you know, whether it's pop culture, whether it's music, whatever it is,
in the air.
It's just there.
It's in the Western air.
So when people go, well, you know, only 12% of women identify as feminists, I'm like, this is a 21st century, bro. Like, just like, can we like have a modern conversation? I think you're right, though, as far as the red pill is concerned. And one thing that really kind of rubs me the wrong way is a lot of people want to conflate the red pill as being sort of like the flip side of feminism. And I think that's one of the biggest straw men that sort of mostly conservatives, traditional conservatives, would like to conflate it as. I'll get back to that in a second, but more to your point here is like, well, can we reclaim it? Can we bring it back to what it is? I think it's going to happen regardless because once you know what'll happen? It'll happen on November 6th.
Okay.
It's where right the day after the election, all this stuff just goes poof because it's exactly what happened right after the 2020 election. We just got out of COVID and we just got out of all this other stuff. And the people were not thinking about politics anymore. They weren't talking about BLM. They weren't talking about Antifa. They weren't talking about that. So suddenly all that stuff just goes away after the election's gone. And now we have to find something else to talk about. And lo and behold, that's right about the time that Myron and Fresh started Fresh and Fit, right? Yes. January of 2021, right after the election. And so what happens is they got in at the right time. Like that's when the cycle was fresh at that point. But as far as sort of reclaiming the name, I think it won't be too difficult to do because so many people are abandoning it right now. So all the people who wanted to get on the red pill train and either be on these podcasts or be a quote unquote red pill influencer, now the best of them are red pill adjacent. The worst of them are just like, you know, throw you under the bus and we never knew you, even though they've been making gravy money off of it for the last 2 or 3 years, just by wanting to be associated, standing in the same room with the red pill, right? So I think that, as I said before, when I was telling them I hope it doesn't go mainstream, once again, the reason why we even would need to reclaim the name or find some way to sort of re-identify, to redefine it, is because we have had so many bad actors come in here and just basically be the whipping boy there. Like for instance, I mean, one of the things I talk about when it comes to like say Pearl Davis is the worst thing that ever happened to the red pill. Simple as that. Because she goes on there and it's like her only purpose is to be ridiculous, is to represent the red pill and be ridiculous. So people can point to her and say, that's what the red pill is. Or Tate, that's what the red pill is. Or who, like, name the worst culprits you can, whoever the straw men are that are there to characterize the red pill or to represent the red pill. And it's easy to attack those people. That's what ends up becoming the universal sort of definition of what red pill is. And I've said this on several other podcasts, but if there is no boogeyman, nobody gets paid. So there has to be, like, it used to be, I'll tell you what's funny, is like back in 2019, the boogeyman was pickup artists.
Okay.
Which was kind of, it was laughable to me at the time because there haven't been pickup artists in like 20 years.
This is in maybe peak Rouge V kind of time.
Well, even Rouge, I wouldn't even say that. Like,
no.
when people talk about, like, back then when people were talking about, like, they were sort of making the straw man was PUAs, right?
Okay.
And so they would conjure this image of, like, say, Mystery in, like, you know, like a top hat and like a feather boa and black fingernail polish. And he's got this, you know, digital, you know, reader on his things and he's in elevator boots. And that's, it's we can laugh about it even today, right? Because it's ridiculous. But that's what people were saying. Oh, you don't want to be like that. You want to be a traditional man and have a wife and 4.5 kids. And, you know, and that now, of course, now we're pointing at, like, guys like Dan Bilzerian or people who are, like, living the life with, like, you know, they're single with a lot of women versus the family man with one woman and a lot of kids, right? So now we're sort of pitting those two together. But as I said, I think probably once the election cycle is over, that conversation is not going to carry the same water that it does right now.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So there are a lot of people out there, a lot of people, including people I know, people I'm close to, who have the idea that red pill is an ideology that's about misogyny, it's anti-women, it's anti-marriage, it's anti-family, it's anti-religion, and that is their genuine understanding of what it means. How do you think that happened?
As I said before, they need a boogeyman. They need a straw man that they can point and sputter at. It kind of depends on the accounts, because I see a lot of personalities sort of come into the space, and it's easy pickings to jump into the manosphere and say those guys are ridiculous, but my religion says that this is the way to go. And it's like, well, then what is it? It's Eastern Orthodox. Are you Orthodox Catholic? Are you evangelical? Are you whatever it is? And so, but they can all agree to hate on the red pill.
Yes.
Like that's the whipping boy, right?
That.
So they can all unite. It doesn't matter what franchise of Christianity you are. We can all we all agree we hate those red pill guys. Yes, yeah. So, but again, as you were saying, it's a convenient straw man. So, but I don't fit those molds, and I'm not trying to, like, personalize this or anything like that. But, like, one of the reasons I don't get the call from guys like Chris Williamson, or I don't get the call from, some of these more, like, bigger name. I shouldn't say Tim Pool, because Tim Pool had me on not too long ago. But the reason I don't get Matt Walsh, for example, or the reason I don't get Michael Knowles.
I think you guys would have such a good conversation.
I think so too. And I'll tell you what's interesting is, like, Matt Walsh just had on a good friend of mine, which is Jim Sexton. He's the divorce attorney. And by the way, you should have him on this show. I'll hook you up with Jim. But because Jim was he and I are very good friends, right? He reads my book. I've been, sort of back and forth with him for a long time. And he just got on with Matt and was just basically just spelling out, like, what I would have said about, like, divorce and marriage and everything else. But it sounds different coming from a guy who's been a divorce attorney for, like, 22 odd years instead of, like, just me. But it's still a red pill conversation that he's having. It's just he's being educated. And so when I talk about the red pill, as I said, it's a praxiology, and people don't like it when I call it that because they think it should be more. You can't tell people information. You can't give them facts these days without telling them how to feel about those facts. So if I break my own rules all the time, which is, like, you got to give people interpretation. It's one thing to have stats and data. It's another thing to give your interpretation of those stats and those data. And you also can't do it in isolation. So too many people just focus on, and the red pill, like a lot of the guys who, personalities in the red pill, are guilty of this just as well. So when I present a data point, I try to do it in correlation to other data points, right? So you can't, instead of just looking at one little teeny tiny tree, you have to see the forest, right? So But I'm like probably one of the few guys that'll do that, because focusing on just that one tree, that's what gets you clicks. That's what gets you engagement. That's what gets you Elon bucks. That's what gets you. Impressions on YouTube, right? So there's the business of all this, being a personality, being an influencer, and then there's sort of like having a dedication to mission, which is what I've been trying to say for a long time. But when we start talking about, like, I hear this all the time. The red pill is an ideology. The red pill is a belief set. The red pill is a cult. The red pill is a religion. The red pill is a philosophy. The red pill is a movement. It is none of those things. In its purest form, the red pill is just praxiology. It is just information. And as I said before, if you just give people information and you don't tell them how to feel about it, they will hate you for it. Or else they will insert their own interpretation and tell you what you think about the information, the data that you just gave. It can be completely neutral. But they, just by the very fact of you tweeting it out or relating it on Substack, or well, I'm a writer, so I go to Substack, but or you put it on your podcast or something, people want to fill in the blanks that you left out just by giving them that data. So if you don't tell them how to feel about it, then they're either going to hate you for that, or they're going to think that, oh, he must agree with me because this data fits with my pre-existing biases.